Chapter 9 On the Way to Azerlin. They ate breakfast, making tea to warm them from the coldness that the hard ground brought against them, and built the fire back up to warm their morning rations. The rations tasted better warm, they found, and were easy to eat as well. Once they had finished eating and had broken down their tents, rolling up the tents and stuffing them back into their stretchy bags, marked tent on the side, Rowan led them in a series of morning stretches to warm their bodies, and they set off up the trail at a leisurely but steady pace. The trail spent most of the morning remaining flat, winding to the left and right as the trees began spreading out, as the ground became a mixture of soil and sand, and the undergrowth, which was once dominated by dead leaves and underbrush, turned to reeds and grass sparsely populated by smaller, less healthy-looking trees, their trunks gnarled and twisted in the morning sun. They walked along the trail, keeping up as best they could with Rowan, who led them and seemed to not notice the others, walking at a solid, unchanging pace regardless of the changing terrain. They avoided potholes, sinkholes, and climbed the sand drifts as though they were the pavement of Tanzeria. The others did their best to keep up with it, but by the time they had stopped for the afternoon, just before noon, by Barkland's estimate, they were all covered in a light sweat. They stopped near a marsh with a small pond. "Grab a few pots of water and start a fire. We're going to boil some of that water to drink," said Rowan, pointing to the brackish water that stood next to them. "It looks awfully gross," said Averly, wrinkling her nose at the smell of it. "It may smell and taste off, but if it's boiled long enough, it'll be safe to drink. I'll show you how to filter it with one of your bags, and we'll use it to fill the water skins. We're going to be traveling from watering hole to watering hole in the desert, because if we don't, we're going to likely die out there in the sand, so get used to the idea of it," said Rowan. "All right," said Averly, tossing her rucksack down. She built a small fire with some of the long grasses that stuck out from the side of the pond in great tufts, smoked a dull gray-blue shade, and stung her eyes. Averly reached into her rucksack and pulled out an unused bag she had stored away and unwrapped it around it one of the large-mouthed pots she had brought. Barkley and Samuel each brought theirs over as well. She filled Samuel's one with the brackish water and then poured it over the pot with the fabric strainer on it, effectively straining out the larger detritus. Removed the cover and placed the pot into the fire to boil. She placed the strainer over Barkland's pot and repeated the procedure. She fitted the strainer over Samuel's pot and dipped it into the pond until it was full of water. Removed the fabric in it too, joined the others. Averly sat and watched the pots boil until the water roiled. She wrung the bag out and placed it next to the fire until it was dry, and cleaned off what she could from the side of the bag the water had been poured through. When she was thoroughly satisfied that anything that could harm them had been burned off, she wrapped the strainer around the now hot handle of the pot and pulled them out one at a time to cool. The water had an odd color to it, a slight purple tint, as though the water was full of minerals of an undetermined type. Averly walked over to the others, who were seated in front of Rowan, who was standing in front of them, resting on his staff, waiting patiently. "Now that we've stopped for the afternoon, we're going to work on your weapons training. You were given weapons at your ceremony a few short days ago, and you're inexperienced with them, and that just won't do if you're ever to protect yourselves or each other properly. So what we're going to do together is train, and that starts with sparring," said Rowan. "You want us to fight each other?" asked Rose. Rowan nodded. "Those of you with weapons need to know what it's like to hit another animal with your weapon, or you may likely pull your strikes when the time comes to actually make the blow count. Averly, you're going to practice a few spells with me and learn how to aim them properly. Barkland, you're also going to be working on aiming, as well as knocking your bow as quickly as possible. Samuel and Rose, you'll be sparring until you learn how to defeat one another," said Rowan. "What if we don't want to hurt each other?" asked Samuel. Rowan looked at him sternly, then smiled. "I didn't say hurt each other, did I? You're going to learn how to hold your weapons, then you're going to learn how to swing them, and then finally you're going to learn how to make contact with each other. Samuel, your sword is going to be in its scabbard its whole time, so you don't slice into Rose accidentally, and Rose isn't going to put her whole weight into her swings, so she doesn't fracture your bones with her staff. It's about finding the fluid motions you're capable of with one another. It'll be your form of dancing before you're done with each other, but at first you're just going to fumble around getting the hang of holding the weapons properly. I only have a week of teaching you things before we get to the ruins, so don't expect too much. It's a lifelong skill, weapon work," said Rowan. Rose and the others nodded. "So, let's get started," said Rowan, walking away from the group. "Take your drink from your skins, then we'll do 90 minutes of sparring and break for lunch." The group got up and followed him to a sandy clearing. The sun beat down on their shoulders as they got into position. They drank from their water skins and threw them on the ground in a pile at the center of the clearing. Rowan walked between them all, spacing them out all apart so they had equal room between them. Samuel readied himself with his sword, holding it in one paw, as his father had taught him, when Chibri's lantern glowed and opened. Chibri popped out and was floating in front of him, looking up at him. "It's quite a serious look you have on your face, Sam," said Chibri playfully. Samuel could feel the scowl on his face break as he realized what Chibri meant. I've got to take this seriously, said Samuel. Oh, sure, or you could use me in battle as well, said Chibri. I don't really want to burn to death, said Rose, worried. Chibri turned to her and smiled devilishly. Don't worry, honey. I know how he feels about you. It only tickles, said Chibri. Rose blushed slightly and looked at her feet sheepishly. Rowan walked over and huffed slightly. Elemental, said Rowan. Chibri. My name is Chibri, said Chibri cheerfully. Chibri. This is weapons training. Samuel needs to learn the weapons he was given, or he'll never be able to learn how to protect himself or any of his friends, said Rowan, pointing a claw at Chibri. Chibri pointed an ethereal finger right back at Rowan. What do you think I am? Said Chibri, poking at Rowan with each time. There's no point in keeping me locked up in this lantern if he's not going to use me for what I was captured for. I'm a fire elemental. I can quite literally rain fire down on his enemies' heads for him if he desires, or offer a protective fire shield to save his friends from certain doom if the need arises. I can certainly help train Rose to help her learn to fight multiple enemies at the same time to build up her skills. Rowan thought it over and sighed. Yes, you're right. It's better he learns to work with you than not use you at all, but for today, he needs to learn to use a sword and we're wasting the cool breeze. Would you mind spectating today so we can get on with it? Asked Rowan. Chibri smiled and nodded. Sure thing, Rowan, said Chibri, moving with Rowan to the side of where Rose and Samuel were standing. Satisfied that Chibri was out of the way, Rowan walked over to where Samuel was standing and checked his grip on the sword and nodded. He walked over to Rose and checked her stance with her staff. He placed his paws on her shoulders and tried to push her over, and seeing that she was steady, nodded. All right, when you two are ready, see if you can trip the other with your weapon without doing any serious damage to one another, said Rowan. Okay, said Samuel. Rose and Samuel looked at one another and nodded. Samuel blinked and Rose was already moving towards him. She was awfully quick. She came in low, swinging her staff low and wide, coming at his legs quickly and surely as though she had been practicing the moves for months. He jumped up and dodged the attack, but before he landed, she planted the staff, whirling around on it, and struck out her legs in a sharp double kick, catching him in the side with both feet that knocked him to the ground. He went sprawling, his sword clattering in a wide arc from him. Samuel was mildly stunned by the attack. Rose walked over and tapped his foot with her staff. Gotcha, said Rose, smiling. Holy hell, said Samuel, wheezing. What hit me? Rose bent down and held out one paw to Samuel, helping him up to a sitting position. He was still dazed, and there was a moment trying to remember what happened. It happened so quickly. He was standing there, then he was on the ground, and it hurt. It hurt rather badly. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Rowan walked over. Rose, you're a natural at this, said Rowan, smiling. You all right? Asked Chibri, concerned. Samuel stood up and looked around for his sword, seeing that it had traveled some distance from himself and rested in the sandy dirt, leaving a small groove behind it as it had traveled. Barklin walked over and picked it up, bringing it back to him. Barklin handed his sword to him. She's a hard hitter, isn't she? Asked Averly, smiling. You have no idea, said Samuel, grimacing. He began dusting himself off and walked back to where he had been standing and readied himself. Let's try that again. Go a little slower this time, said Samuel, grinning at Rose. No chance, said Rose, grinning wildly. They began sparring again while Rowan walked over to where Barklin and Averly were standing. Okay, you two, your lessons are a little more involved, so you're going to have to bear with me while we work on them, all right? Said Rowan. Barklin, let's get your bow sorted. Barklin held up his bow and shouldered his quiver, which he had removed from his rucksack. All right, so you know how to nock an arrow, correct? Asked Rowan. Yes, sir, said Barklin. That was covered before the ceremony. Great, so let's work on aim, said Rowan. He reached into a small pouch around his waist and pulled out 2 apples and walked 20 paces down the clearing from where they were standing. Rowan placed the apples, one on top of the other, on a small mound of sandy dirt, and walked back to where the others were standing. Okay, nock an arrow and see if you can hit either one of these apples, said Rowan. Barklin readied an arrow, aimed, taking a deep breath in as he had been taught, breathing out when he was ready to fire, and released the arrow. It flew straight but hit to the right of the 2 apples, thudding dully in the dirt. Keep trying until you hit both apples in a row, all right? If you run out of arrows, go and pick them back up and keep trying, said Rowan. All right, said Barklin, readying another arrow. His quiver was packed with arrows ready to use. Rowan walked over to where Averly was waiting. Are you ready to try some magic then, Averly? Asked Rowan. Very much so, said Averly. Good. Let's get started, said Rowan, reaching into his pouch and pulling out a stack of papers that looked familiar. Those look like the same papers you gave me back in Tanzaria, said Averly. Rowan nodded. The very same. These have some spells added to them, said Rowan. He passed a small portion of the papers to Averly, who held them up, studying the runes on the page. What spells are these? These look like some of the runes on the fire spells I used last night, said Averly. Very good. It's exactly the same type of rune, used in a different manner. These are smoke spells. When they fire, they let out plumes of colored smoke, so you don't end up hurting yourself or others while learning to use beginning magical attack spells, said Rowan. Avery looked over the spells. The shape of the ruins made a small cloud. She dragged the claw over the two ruins that ended the spell, connecting them. The spell shone a dull green-gray, and a plume of green smoke shot out from the paper and up into the air, covering Averly. The smoke plume lasted for about 10 seconds before fizzling to a small sputter and dying out completely at the end where it had started. Averly coughed, waving her arms in front of her to clear the air. Rowan waved his arms in the same manner and laughed. And that, child, is how you activate the spells, and how I would like you to learn to write your spells in the future for easy completion, said Rowan, coughing as he cleared the air with both arms. Averly continued to wave her arms until the smoke completely disappeared. She looked at the paper again where she had scratched it. The groove that her nail had made was a fresh green compared to the dull green ink of the spell, and it was a short distance between the 2 points of the paper. There was a dark spot on the first half of the paper where the majority of the spell had activated, where the smoke had billowed out from, and the paper was stained with a deep green residue that shone sickly in the afternoon light. You can aim this paper by holding it like this and flicking the connection with your nail like so, said Rowan, demonstrating with one of the pieces of paper. This time the plume of smoke was purple, shooting 20 feet out in front of the mouse, up into the air at an angle and catching on the breeze. It hung in the air and drifted lazily in the wind as it caught it. So you want me to practice launching the spells? Asked Averly. Right. You're also going to try aiming it. If you try focusing it, the smoke will be able to thin down and go farther. All the spells are different colors. I want to see how tight and far you can get the spells to fire before we have to stop for the day, said Rowan. Okay, I can do that, said Averly. Rowan nodded. I'm sure you can, said Rowan. Rowan walked away from Averly and back to where Rose and Samuel were sparring. They had moved into fluid motions where they tapped at each other, moving from one attack to the next attack without stopping, hopping about. Rose moved quickly, bouncing around Samuel easily from leg to leg, using her staff as an extension of herself as naturally as one could. Samuel was getting the hang of closing his body off from easy attacks which Rose would openly exploit, and learning to take openings as Rose showed them. They're quick studies, thought Rowan. He watched them spar for a while before moving back to Barkland to see how he was doing. He came to find the clearing littered with arrows and the apples untouched by anything whatsoever. Barkland was obviously getting tired as well as frustrated by his lack of success. Having some trouble, are you, Barkland? Asked Rowan. Seems so, said Barkland stiffly. His quiver was almost empty and much lighter than when he had started. Have you tried taking off your glasses? Asked Rowan. Barkland blinked at him, lowering his bow. What do you mean, not using my glasses? I always use them. I've needed them to read since I was a child, said Barkland. Rowan nodded. Yes, but books are so very close, aren't they? Have you tried taking them off and tried truly seeing the apples for what they are? Asked Rowan. Barkland shook his head. Well, go ahead and try it, said Rowan. Barkland lifted off his glasses, squinting. He rubbed his eyes until they normalized in the afternoon sun. Knock another arrow and let your muscles guide your arrow. And know exactly where the apple is. Let the arrow find it, said Rowan. Barkland did as he was told. He took a deep breath in, pulling the arrow back, held it, and released his breath and the arrow. It found its mark in the center of the upper apple, knocking it clear off the lower apple, which tumbled off the hill of dirt and rolled down until it came to rest a few feet below the small hill. I got it! Exclaimed Barkland, excited. Yes, you did. You can always see, Barkland. Remember that. You just have to remember to see properly. Sometimes it takes a moment to clear your head and do that, said Rowan. Now go pick up your apples and reset that apple and hit them both in a row. Barkland nodded. Sure thing, Rowan, said Barkland. Rowan nodded, patting Barkland on the arm, and made his way over to where Averly was working on her spell control. Rowan stood beside her as she fired a thin plume of orange smoke down the clearing 50 feet from where they were standing into the ground. It splashed against the dirt, raising plumes of orange and brown sand where it landed, and left a small cratered trough where the impact had fallen. Averly's tattoo stopped glowing, and the small smile that graced the corners of her lips remained as Rowan walked up next to her. That's very good. You've got very good focus control, said Rowan. Thanks. It's been getting easier, said Averly. Once you can get the plumes down to half a foot wide and 100 feet long, you'll be able to hit pinpoint targets with little struggle, said Rowan. Great. Do you think there'll be much call for that? Asked Averly. You never know, but it's better to have the skill than to need it instead of not to be able to use it, said Rowan. Good point, said Averly. Averly let loose another spell, this time a light blue, her tattoo glowing against the fur of her face. The aqua blue inky smoke shot out in a thinner line than the orange, reaching farther than it had and splashing against the ground 20 feet ahead of the orange crater in a small cone of azure that landed in driblets along the ground, leading all the way back to where Averly was standing just short of her feet. Good shot, exclaimed Rowan, clapping Averly on the back of her leg. Averly looked down at Rowan and smiled. Thanks, said Averly. Will we be heading in for a break soon, you think? It's starting to get awfully hot out there. Rowan turned and looked at the others. Yes, I think it's time we put up some shade and head to lunch, said Rowan. Avery and Rowan walked to Barkland and helped him gather his arrows and the apples they had been practicing on. Barkland bit into one of them as they walked over to where Rose and Samuel were still sparring. Samuel swung his sword, catching Rose under her arm in the ribs, and knocked her down, her staff clattering to the ground, and she let out a grunt. Oof, said Rose as she hit the ground. Samuel walked over and helped her up. Rowan and the others walked over. Lunchtime already? Asked Rose, smiling while rubbing her tender ribs. Yes, indeed, said Barkland, munching on his thoroughly run-through apple. That sounds good. Takes a lot out of you getting hit a bunch of times, said Samuel, rubbing a tender swell on the top of his head that Rose had given him. You'll be all right, said Rose, elbowing him playfully in the ribs. Samuel winced and smiled back. You two seem to have enjoyed yourself, said Ron. Oh, yes, it was a lot of fun getting to use my staff, said Rose. Yes, she doesn't go easy on you in any way, shape, or form, said Samuel, laughing. Rose beamed up at him. You